all to our seventh offering in the Transforming Learning Summit Speaker Series this month with Glen Irvin and his session, Podcasting and Gamification in Education. My name is Dave Blanchard, and I'm the chair of the volunteer steering committee that runs this summit and this speaker series, as well as an assistant professor in the Department of Teacher Development at St. Cloud State University and a board member with Fusion Learning Partners. I'm going to give you a little bit of background information on the work that we do, the speaker series, and our plans for the future, followed by some quick housekeeping for this session. Now, Fusion Learning Partners' mission is to serve the public and civic sector with events, programs, and services that inspire innovation for the greater good. We are very excited to be able to share with you that all of this series will be having continuing education units emailed out to anyone who's participated in any of our live webinar series. So the CEUs are going to be issued starting with today's session, and our team will back roll those as well. We are able to do this in partnership with St. Cloud State. And we also want to make sure that we are communicating some really exciting news about our 2021 Transforming Learning Summit event, which is a 2-day virtual event in August. And we now have our call for proposals open, and you are able to get more information about the summit at the website that I just popped in our chat. So we really encourage any of the educators in the room to be able to take a look at that and see where they can contribute to the greater good in education, share their expertise, their personal experience, and their passions with others. We are excited to announce that today's session, as well as all of the offerings in that speaker series, and the 2021 Transforming Learning Summit are going to be qualifying for that CEU, and we are going to share more information about that in a follow-up email. We are currently working on our next speaker series offering for April, so be sure to keep an eye on an email invite with that information. And then we are going to be wrapping up the speaker series as the school year ends and we transition into the summer. All of the offerings in our speaker series will lead us to the 2021 Transforming Learning Summit, which will be held virtually again, and that's going to be on August 11th and 12th, featuring Michael Bonner and Mandy Freilich, who will be our keynote speakers, as well as a great agenda of educational and developmental offerings for all of us within the education sector. The purpose of the Transforming Learning Summit is to inspire educators who are transforming systems and practices for the success of all students by making the learning experience relevant and meaningful. And that call for proposals is currently open and has a deadline of Friday, April 2nd. So you can find more information about that on the website that I popped in the chat. And we really encourage you to not only share the link, but also be able to reflect on what your passions are and submit one also. Now, a little housekeeping for today's event. If you're able to, please make sure that your Zoom name is set as the name that you registered for so that we can record you joining us today. If you're unable to do that, please direct message Fusion Learning Partners in the chat with your name so that we can get that updated on our end. As a reminder, everyone should choose the speaker view in the top right corner so that you'll only see the speaker. Gallery view will update so that you can see all of the participants. And since this is a Zoom meeting, not a webinar, anyone who turns their webcam on is able to see each other. You are not going to be able to unmute yourselves until a Q&A session a little bit later, and we can unmute you if you let us know in the chat. We want you to utilize the chat so that we can pull questions and answers for that session at the end of the presentation. And we also have tech support if you're having any issues. Now, we would like to give a huge thank you to our series sponsor, Pearson, because without their generous contributions, we would not be able to offer this speaker series as a free event. And our work on the speaker series has also been recognized by the Bush Foundation, who supports organizations and people who think bigger and think differently about what is possible within their communities. We thank all of our sponsors and donors for their contributions. Additional shoutouts include donors like Sourcewell Tech, Western Bank, Osmo for School, and eLibrary Minnesota, as well as a number of others that were on our welcome slide and on our website. You can find more information about all of our partners on the website. Now, we do need to make sure to mention all of the volunteers who serve on the steering committee, as they have been instrumental in guiding this work, and we thank them for their dedication. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce Glen Irvin. Glen has been in education for over 20 years and is currently working as an instructional coach in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. Glen was previously a Spanish teacher, and Glen is very well known by the Schoology community as the gamification expert, Schoology ambassador, and he was the 2016-17 Schoology Educator of the Year. He is also a co-host of On Education podcast, whose goal is to have honest conversations about teachers, teaching, and everything in between. Now, Glen, I am so excited to have you here today presenting your session, Podcasting and Gamification in Education. So please, thank you so much, and let's get started.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Very, very excited to be here. Like Dave said, please feel free to post questions in the chat, and I'm going to try to be, there's a lot to present. There's a lot to talk about. When Dave approached me about the opportunity to go ahead and speak about both podcasting and gamification, just so that you're aware, both of those topics are not only sessions that I've done, just the individual sessions for an hour. They are actually 3-hour workshops that I have done for those individually. So there's a lot to cover. And really what, when I come to any of these types of things, any kind of professional development, what I would want, and that's what I'm hoping to give you, are ideas that you can go ahead and use and implement in your class. And then the resources, which I have tons of resources for you to be able to then use later, to be able to come back to these types of things. So if you miss something or whatever, I'm going to be sharing, obviously, all of the resources that I talk about. You'll have access to them. You'll be able to become a member and actual admin inside of one of my Schoology courses where it shows you an example of some gamification stuff. I have tons of resources that have to do with podcasting itself too. And you are welcome to use any of those or to share them with anyone else. And all of my resources that I've created, you could do with them whatever you want to go ahead and do with them. So repackage them and then go ahead and present them to your staff if you choose to go ahead and do that. So let me go ahead and press share screen here. And I'm going to go ahead and come to this. And we're all good. Fantastic. And like I said, I'm going to be going through this. And so it's okay if you post some questions into the chat, and then I will check them periodically, or we'll have Dave make sure that he follows up with me at the end. Okay. So podcasting and gamification, when I was thinking about, how these two topics kind of merge together. Number one, they're my passions. As Dave just talked about, I was a former Spanish teacher. And I was passionate about engaging my students in any way possible. And I wanted to make sure that I offered my students a way for their voices to be heard. And I think that's the biggest connection between these two topics is gamification, game-based learning, and podcasting. All offer ways to be able to lift up our students and hear all of their voices and make sure that their voices and their opinions and their choices even are heard and followed as far as in your classes, and ways and techniques of being able to go ahead and do that, amplifying student voice, if you will. So one of the things that I talk about as far as gamification is concerned is you need to have a framework. And I'm going to start with gamification first here. Because it's a big topic and there's lots to it. And I'm going to try to give you just kind of some big ideas, things that you can do in your classroom, even tomorrow, that you can go ahead and implement and change. or at least think about and then maybe implement them over the summer and then be able to make some kind of bigger changes if you will. But you need a framework in order for it to be successful. And sometimes it gets confusing as far as gamification is concerned because there's all of these terms out there. There's games, game-based learning, and gamification. And a lot has been written about all of these different topics specifically, but I'm not here to try to, say, define one or that this one is better than the other. They all are aspects of similar things, and they all offer great things to your class. And the way that I like to view it as a teacher and now as an instructional coach is that there's an opportunity to be able to use little pieces of either the layering of game-based elements, which would be gamification, or actual games like game-based learning in your classes to be able to not only engage your students, but basically bring the learning to a new level. Many people have asked me, why gamification? I remember a colleague of mine called it Mindcraft because I was using Minecraft in my class. They weren't familiar with the term. They call it Mindcraft, and they're like, "Why are you doing all this work, creating these things and this gamification stuff and whatever it might be?" And my answer was simple for me: is I just had students in my classes that I could no longer ignore. There were students who were clearly bored and it didn't matter what I was doing. They were disengaged, checked out. They really didn't care. And this picture reminded me of them. They were 16 years old, and maybe you have some of these students, doesn't matter what age range. And basically the school system has sapped all of their passion for learning out of their bodies, like zombies. And it didn't matter what I was doing. I couldn't get them to buy in. And so I needed something different. I needed to shift the way that I was actually approaching as far as the way I was teaching. And so for me, when I define gamification, I think it's an outcomes-based mastery learning environment that includes differentiation, student voice, choice also. It needs to be immersive and engaging, fun. Some people are afraid of that word, and you shouldn't be. It's motivational, it's a collaborative environment, and it allows students to be creative, and it builds their confidence and resilience. And when people see this slide, they're like, yeah, I can get behind that. But they don't really ever associate it specifically with gamification, and you should, because that's really what it is. What I wanted to do is I wanted to use gamification to make sure that I was able to get those energetic, passionate, curious students back in my class that I knew were hidden beneath the zombie exterior, if you will. And you can see this kid here. I love this picture and I love this kid. That's the kind of excitement that I was going for. That I wanted to bring out of my students because I knew it was in there. Even when they were in high school, I knew that they still had that in them. I just needed to peel back the layers and find that passion within them. So there are many people that I highly recommend following, and I'll have it in my resources as far as people that you should follow if you are into using social media. These are just some of my inspirations. Steve Isaacs on the top left, Paul Darvasi and Mike Matera, and Chris Avilas are up at the top there. Jane McGonigal's in the bottom left, Matt Farber, Dr. Chris Haskell, and then John Fallon are in this picture. And really what they are is just a group of amazing educators who have shared, whether in books and articles and lesson plans and everything in between, tons of awesome ideas about how to use either games themselves or the elements of games to really bring out the passion in your students. And really, in a way, it brought out the passion and excitement in me too. And that's really what I strive for when I'm coaching now as far as other teachers. I want them also to be passionate because I know that carries forward to their kids and their teaching. So what is gamification? Sometimes when I bring up the topic, there's a there's a group of people who may say some of these things. They're like, yeah, it's that thing where you just have lots and lots of points, or there's extrinsic motivation. You're rewarding kids for things, or you're just playing games in class. Though you could play games in class, and that is could be part of this. Some people have told me directly to my face and sometimes behind me that it's not good for learning, or that it's just a fad. And what I want you to go ahead and know is that everything that I'm talking about here are all just great fundamental ways of teaching and instructing. And not only great, but they are also fantastic ways, again, of motivating students and being able to bring out their best too. So I would say, even though people have defined it as that, it's not really that. So let's talk about some of the things that it actually is. Some people say, okay, I kind of get it, but like, what do I even do, Glenn? Like, how do I even get started? And I always tell people, one of the easiest ways to get started is first look, and this is just great teaching, first look and examine what are the outcomes that you want your students to be able to reach. I'll admit that for many years early in my career, I didn't even do this. I didn't start off with the outcomes. I didn't design backwards. And successful gamification, or any kind of good teaching, starts with backwards design. You identify the desired results, and then you determine what is the acceptable evidence for demonstrating those results. And that's where you can get creative. Too often, the demonstration of results, basically the assessment, is something that is automated at times. So a test inside of Schoology, for example, or it's just something that can only show one lens of what a student knows. So it's very narrow. And that's where I want you to explore beyond those things. So you're planning exciting learning, and Dr. Haskell used to call them experiences for your instruction, not just like an activity, definitely not a worksheet, but what are those experiences you can design so that you can bring out and say, hey, I want kids to be here. Now I have to design those experiences. Another thing that I did not ever do as an instructor until way later in my career is really let the students and any other stakeholders know what are the outcomes, like what do they need to be able to do. And I used, I posted my outcomes in our learning management system, and my students and their parents and my admin and anybody, that was a stakeholder could see what it is that we were focused on and working towards. And my students could say, okay, here's what I need to be able to demonstrate. And for many years, my students were basically shooting at random targets and moving targets. And they didn't really know what it was that I was really wanting, because I didn't really know either. And so when I talk to teachers about that, I say, it may seem obvious, but many times it's not. And I think it's important. In this case, I put my outcomes as I can statements. And I thought that they were very clear, easy to be able to understand for my students. So I would tell them my outcomes in each of the different, let's call them units. I call them nivel here. Sometimes I had missions, depending upon how my language was changing, but the students knew exactly what it was that they were expected to be able to go ahead and do. So easy enough. That's maybe obvious. One of the next things that I tell people is like, okay, one of the things that demotivated my students was grading. And you may find that too, and you may already be exploring those conversations. One of the things that was successful in my class, and you can take it or not take it, but it's this concept of XP grading. And if you've ever played any video games, specifically role-playing games as far as video games, there's this concept of XP, or experience. You start off with 0 experience, and you gain experience as you progress in the game. That that is basically the ultimate concept of XP grading. You start off at 0, and then you move forward, and then you're able to go ahead and advance forward and grow as far as a student is concerned. So XP grading, as I put here, it's a philosophical change. You start off with 0 points, and then you gain experience, and that may be troublesome to some educators. They're like, I don't understand, Glenn. I don't understand how it goes. But really what you do is you have an ultimate plan as far as like how many XP points are needed to be able to succeed as far as in this class. And you design everything kind of in this backwards way anyway, and you decide, okay, how are the students going to prove that they've learned something, basically demonstrate achievement of whatever it is, and then how many points or whatever it might be. And it was actually a really, really cool, motivating way of basically doing grading. So XP, unlike typical grading, where you start off, with, let's say 100 points and everything goes backwards, this XP always goes up. You never take away points. So all you can do is continue to go ahead and grow and be able to kind of accumulate those points as you go through. It takes some planning. It does take some planning, and it does take some thinking through like what it is that you actually want your students to do. But in this case, as you can see here, I clearly told the students like what it was, how much things were specifically worth, and they could go ahead and basically plan their learning and their process and what they wanted to go ahead and achieve and do. I think some people do this as, you write at the beginning of a unit, like, what's my goal here? Like, what grade do I want, or what do I want to be able to learn, and so on. It's a very similar type of concept. And one of the things that I adopted right from the beginning when I was learning about all these different things that gamification is concerned, but just even in general, mastery learning, I wanted to make sure that my students had as many opportunities as they needed to be able to go ahead and redo assignments and quizzes and tests, because failure is not final in games, and that's what makes them exciting and challenging, yes, but also where you can say, hey, I actually can grow. We talk a lot about in education about this thing called growth mindset. And if you ask teachers, they say, yeah, I promote that as far as in my classes. But do you really promote that? That's what I really ask people. And how you prove that is, are students allowed to really master content, or is a grade a grade? Is it final basically there? So students were allowed to redo and revise assignments if they didn't meet the expectations, and they were expected to do so. So they knew that, you turn in something and it's just not up to par, that you were going to have to revise and redo and improve until it was acceptable. One thing I would caution, and a big mistake that I made, is using leaderboards. And in this case, you can see this is actually taken from one of my Spanish 1 classes. Though the leaderboard was anonymous, you can see they have the learner tags were fake names there. It actually was demotivating to many of my students. They didn't like the leaderboard. They found themselves, if they found themselves lower on the lower end of the leaderboard, it was demotivating towards them. And I found it to be basically, it was working against what I was trying to promote in my classes. So I caution you to not use individual leaderboards like this. If you do use a leaderboard, maybe use it in kind of a group context, or like the class against the teacher, kind of something to that effect, where you do something to that so that it can be motivating versus demotivating. Thing that I do, or that I did, is that I wanted students to continue to learn in class. So in my class, you needed to achieve a certain number of XP, experience points. But I would let students continue to earn more of those experience points, and we would celebrate that. How, like, this person has achieved 30,000 XP, amazing, and they will have a wall of fame as far as in the classroom. And what was cool is that in each quarter, we could actually start these kind of point totals over with. So you were never felt like you were just completely out of it. So to wrap up, why should you use XP grading? It empowers students because with choice, they know the value of the assignments, quizzes, tests right up ahead. They know where to get to, where they're going to. Grades only go up. And every student can set a target for that specific grade that they actually want. So it's an idea. Hopefully it actually is something that you consider or take a piece of that as far as being able to go ahead and adopt for your classes. One of the coolest things growing up, I don't know if anybody recognizes this, but these were my favorite books growing up. And they were choose your own adventure books. Maybe you recognize them. And the best part of these books was that if you could choose your own adventure. And if you made a mistake as the protagonist, you could just go back to a page where you made the initial decision and kind of start over and kind of continue on a different path. Or even if you went a certain path, you could go back and kind of see what are my different pathways towards, in this case, the outcome of this novel. It's a very similar concept to what I'm referring to as quest-based learning, which is part of gamification and is something that Dr. Chris Haskell popularized in his classes. And basically what it does is it promotes student choice. And it lets students have voice and choice, and it lets them choose the assignments, which I called quests, that they find interesting and compelling and fun and suited to their skills. And they also have options to be able to create their own assignments so their voice is heard, as long as they are targeting the desired outcomes. And so that is the main concept of quest-based learning. I did this in various different ways, but one of the ways that I did this was in kind of this adventure board, if you want to call it that, a pathway where you could choose different things, and some of the things you had to do and some of the things you could do as far as in class. So think of it as this. You have a thing, you're teaching a specific concept in class, and then a normal teaching thing would be that you'd have a variety of different activities to practice that, right? And so I did the same thing. I had some things that I would normally use, some things that the students loved in the past, and some new things that I had created. And then I gave students choices as far as some of the things that they could go ahead and do to accumulate basically the number of XP that they needed in order to, and as you can see on the way right side of this page or the slide, you can see where it says Misión Uno bosses. So they have to accumulate a certain number of points, basically the practice, in order to go ahead and attempt the boss battle, which was the assessments. And the students, you don't need to talk in that teacher lingo. The students just love the ability to be able to make their own decisions and choices, and then be able to go ahead and assess and prove to you that, yeah, I actually do know how to do this. One of the questions that I get from educators is, how do I create enough assignments to be able to do something like this, Glenn? How do you do this on every single, little unit? Usually these lasted 2 weeks. And the way that I did it is a combination of things. Obviously, experience over the number of years, I had a catalog of things that were successful. So I used those things, obviously. And then sometime with the students giving the students the ability to create their own assignments, they sometimes came up with way better ideas that I could then use later on and go like, oh, here's a different option, a different path of being able to demonstrate your ability to do X, Y, and Z, whatever those outcomes specifically were. So the students were connected to that too. And that was awesome. And it helped me to basically each year kind of improve upon the set of activities, experiences that we would have the students participate in for each of these different units. So you're going to incorporate quest-based learning. You're thinking about XP grading. You maybe have heard of something called badging, and it's one of the things that you can do tomorrow. I promise you. My wife is an English language arts teacher at the high school here that I am an instructional coach at. And she was able to incorporate badging in her composition class with seniors. And it went phenomenally. And she didn't have to invest a super large amount of time, yet it was very successful for student buy-in. Let me tell you more about badges and achievements. Basically, what we want to do is we want to find a way to celebrate mastery. So badges, it says it's important to not give badges for everything. Some people have made that mistake. So we don't want to over badge because it devalues the concept. We want to give badges for when students attain a specific skill or knowledge that they're working towards. So in this case, you can see they can be given as a physical badge or a digital badge. Let's talk more about those things. So badges must be visible. They're designed so students know why they actually earn them, so that you can clearly see, why did I earn this? On this badge, you can see kind of on the right side, I don't know if you can read it, but the badge is called Me Llamo Que. It's a play on Eminem, My Name Is What. And it says below it, I can exchange names with someone and respond to introduction. It says, why did they get this? How did they earn this thing? They're given as close to the action as possible. So when a student does this and is able to do this, you are able to give them the badge right at that moment, because it reinforces that behavior. If you give it later, it's just like any kind of feedback. If you give it later, it loses its power and it loses that awesomeness. There are different ways of being able to give badges, digital and physical badges. Inside of Schoology, for example, there was a way to be able to design badges and be able to assign them to students. And students really didn't get into this. Maybe yours will. There's a ton of ways to design digital badges. And in kind of a remote learning environment, it probably would have been the only way to do this, you know? But when you get back to face-to-face, or if you do either this year or next year, if you have an opportunity to create physical badges, and they just can be really cheesy, trust me, everyone. I printed them out on kind of construction paper and cut them out myself. And then I also passed out these sheets. I don't know if you can see those plastic sheets there. They are kind of like baseball card holders or game card holders. And I would pass those out to students each try or each semester. And as they earned badges, they would put them in there. And even high school students would get super excited about these physical badges that were printed on cardstock, and I printed them with a color printer. And basically they would place them inside of those slots. And it was like 8-year-old kids when they would collect Pokemon cards. So what are the badges? They're basically a way of demonstrating formative assessment. It's a way of saying, hey, you actually know how to do this specific skill, here you go. And it's been done obviously with like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and those types of things in the military and so many different ways. But in education, it has kind of been done, but not to the extent that I think is even possible to go ahead and do that. So another concept that you may think about, and you can kind of see it on one of my badges. Let me go back a bit. There was 100 AP that it said right beside the name of this badge here. And the AP were achievement points. And it was a system that Chris Aviles used as far as in his classes, one of the guys that I learned a ton from. And he used badges, plus he used what he called achievement points. And a lot of people have used these kind of concepts. And in my class, earning a badge meant you got this virtual currency. We called it pesos. And you could spend this virtual currency in a virtual store. You don't have to do this, but it's another technique that has been successful as far as in my class and in other people's classes too. But you can see as far as in this little cartoon here, this little meme, is you don't want to give physical rewards. Learn from my mistakes. Don't give students anything that costs money. Don't give students homework passes. I did that. That was terrible. It was a terrible idea. Don't give them anything that allows them to skip the assessments or the quizzes as far as in your classes, because that's actually where you they can demonstrate their learning, you need those in order to be able to see if they've actually picked up on those concepts and learned those outcomes. I made those mistakes. You don't make them. So the things that you can design for rewards are things like this, giving the students the ability to have some sort of status or access or powers, and stuff is the last thing that you have. So rarely, if ever, do we have stuff as far as the rewards there. I'm going to go to skip this thing, but I had a video that explained, and I have it as far as in my YouTube channel, how do the achievement points work and what can you do with them. But really what it was the students had the ability to purchase things that previously I just gave away. Let me give you some examples. The ability to choose wherever they want to go and sit. The ability to be able to listen to the music that they want to during activity time in class. Wearing hats, things that were against the normal school rules, but we broke them as far as in our classes themselves. And things that are acceptable as far as within the norms of your school and as far as in your class. I even gave students the ability, and these were super popular, the ability to open up what I called secret missions. And basically what it was more learning, the ability to basically open up learning modules that were for specific holidays, as far as my Spanish classes, or things that were thematic towards the what we were learning at the moment, or cultural units. So they were basically opening up things to be able to learn more, and they were using their achievement points to open those things up. And it was more about status. They were like, hey, look, I got to open up these things and I'm learning these other things, et cetera, whatever it might be. And it motivated all of the students. So what about games themselves? So we call it gamification. What about games that you're using? You can use games, both you probably use activities currently that are either digital games or just games that you play together as a class. And they are powerful, but they can also be overused. That's what I always tell people. So there's things like, as far as in my classes, I use like Duolingo just for reinforcement practice. Quizlet Live, of course. There's a great site called Deck Toys that a whole bunch of people don't know about that is fantastic. Many of the functions are free inside of it. Take a look at it, and it can be used for anything. It's a great site. And of course, real games that have been borrowed, commercial games, and then borrowed and used in the classroom too. One of the games that I highly recommend taking a look at is Minecraft, because it's so flexible and it has the ability basically to be adapted to any kind of environment, and it creates the best game-based learning situations. And I found that second language learning plus Minecraft was amazing. And what I've done is I've accumulated a number of lesson plans that I've shared with world language teachers basically around the world. And I have them in the resource document that I will share with all of you. And even though they're specific to world languages, the ideas behind it can be adapted to fit any content area. And now Minecraft is so huge, and Minecraft Education Edition is so huge, that there's tons of lesson plans that are fantastic for a wide variety of content areas and grade levels. So if you're interested in that, for sure explore that. And if you have specific questions about that later, let me know too. So there is a guy, his name is Michael Matera, and he wrote a fantastic book that is actually right here, right behind me. And that is called Explore Like a Pirate. And in this book, highly recommend reading it. So great read, very motivating for any educator. But in the book, he basically talks about this concept of theme, of basically theming your class towards things. Let me talk a little bit more about that. Basically choosing a theme that fits with something that's you're passionate about as far as in your classes. And I'm going to show you mine, and then maybe you'll kind of get an idea, but it could be anything. It could be pirates or futuristic world, dystopian future, or steampunk. You can see here, it could be from a television series or a movie or whatever it might be. And you can use the language that comes from this specific theme to kind of rebrand what you're doing in class. So instead of calling it an activity or, God forbid, a worksheet or whatever it might be, you have a different something for it. Don't use worksheets, but I'm saying that too. So you want to create an immersive environment as far as in the class with theme. And so having a theme, a setting, some characters that you might go ahead and use, and some sort of action. And you even can have a storyline as is described by Michael Matera as far as in his classes, something that drives the storyline all throughout the year. If it sounds super overwhelming, it kind of is, but it isn't also, because when you start seeing examples of it, you're like, oh, I can pick and choose some things that actually fit with my personality or my specific students that I teach. So if you're at the high school level, maybe you're not going to go full immersive, but if you're middle school or elementary, you might be able to go ahead and do something like the things that Michael talks about as far as in his book. In my Spanish 1 class, we had a theme centered around one of my favorite characters, and I called it Donde está Sandra Santa Fe? So Sandra Santa Fe was my main kind of thematic thing, and it was from Carmen Sandiego. I'm aging myself probably here. But basically, I changed the language in my class from assignments. We had stakeouts, and units were missions, and I had secret folders, and I embedded clues in assignments and in the class. And it was just basically for a fun way of approaching even the entire year. And I would use a variety of different things as far as social media tools and to make my characters come to life. And really what I wanted to do is kind of bring out the curiosity as far as my students, because they want things like intrigue and suspense and a kind of a greater meaning for things. And even if it's just pretend, it's a great way of bringing those things out from your students. So some of the pitfalls that that could happen with gamification, you have to think about making sure that you give your students that freedom to fail. That mastery learning is a key. Don't just do what's called chocolate covered broccoli, as you can see here, which is basically have a horrible activity, a worksheet, and then just do something and layer it on top. Most of the time, especially if you do that often, that doesn't really work. So tacking gamification onto learning. Leaderboards gone wrong, so I wouldn't for sure use leaderboards. It says not giving students voice or choice as far as your thing. Giving too many badges would be a mistake too. Not planning ahead. Some of the things do require some kind of planning ahead, or at least planning the entire unit that you're going to go ahead and try, and then having kind of that all layered out and planned ahead. And making sure that you have a consistent feedback loop. So an achievement is earned, you're consistently giving that feedback to your students. Or the final one, which I often did, and is basically take on too much. Take a couple of these ideas and then go with those. That's what I highly recommend doing. So that would be a successful gamified framework, a way to be able to incorporate many different aspects as far as of gamification and be able to put them all within your classes. So one of my big passions besides gamification and game-based learning is podcasting. And I have a podcast that's an education-based podcast. And I've had the opportunity actually to speak to many educators about passing on this passion to their students to amplify their voice. And I think it perfectly fits with gamification and game-based learning because there's this power in being able to get your voice out there. And podcasting is so simple and requires so little tech that it can be done by anybody from anywhere. And that's why it's so popular. So really quickly, you may obviously already know what podcasting is. They're super popular, and it's a way to basically digitize any kind of audio. But why are podcasts so popular? Well, you can listen to them from any time. You can easily download them. And listeners, as it says here at the bottom, they consume the content more intently. So you're more likely to be able to kind of get into a podcast as you're doing kind of some other tasks, whether it be working out or cleaning or whatever else it might be. You're really getting into the content itself. You're really listening in and listening more intently. Why choose podcasting? Well, it's related to the ISTE-NET standards. You can adapt it to any content area or grade level. And I have many examples of everything from elementary, amazing podcasts, all the way obviously through the high school level. There's a true SEL connection, a social emotional learning connection there. It's a real world activity. So you're doing something that's related to some that possibly the students could explore later on. It supports all of your learners, and it obviously amplifies your students' voices. There's many examples of student podcasts, and I actually have a resource document that I'm going to share. And usually we go through and listen to podcasts themselves, but because of limitation of time and I want to be able to answer questions, we're not going to listen to all of these, but I highly recommend if you're like wondering, okay, what's an elementary student capable of doing? I've got some amazing examples. There's a guy here in Minnesota. His name is Jesse Buto that I highly recommend following. He's at Mr. Buto on Twitter. And he has a series of podcasts that he has done for years. And he calls it This Fifth Grade Life. And it's mirrored after a very popular podcast called This American Life. And these students tell these stories that are connected to family or events, or they interview like their grandparents, and they tell these amazing stories about their families, their culture, and connections, and then share these things in a really highly professional way that will blow your mind. And Jesse does this every single year, and they've done basically like a series. So each year is a different series, and I think they're now at series 7 or so. So he's done it for many, many years. Highly recommend following Jesse and then checking out This Fifth Grade Life. And I have the link to all of their podcasts too. There is an amazing contest that NPR puts on each year, and it's a podcast challenge. And actually, I think it's going on right now that students are able to enter. So if you're wanting to like, okay, motivate the students and be like, okay, what can we work towards a real life audience, right? And they can enter this contest for grades 5, or I think it's actually grades 5 through 8 is one category, and the grades 9 through 12 is a different category that the students can enter. And there was this group of winners here from this past year that they taught their listeners how to speak Mandarin. But not only that was the podcast, but they were also informing them of harassment and bullying that was taking place in their communities due to the coronavirus and being targeted as far as in their specific communities. An amazing podcast. You listen to this and your mind is gonna be blown, and you can see a picture of these kids there. They won the 5 through 8 challenge. The Flossy podcast was the winners of the 9 through 12 podcast. Again, I will link these also. And these students, they attended a climate march, and they basically were describing what they were experiencing, interviewing people that were at the march, and then reflecting upon what was the march about, and then how they themselves probably are being vastly affected by some of these things, yet their community maybe isn't as aware of these topics as they should be. So fantastic, amazing entries into these podcast contests. So how do you get started with podcasting? It's actually super simple. You can start with just very, very, very basic technologies. I always tell educators to make sure that you teach your kids how to podcast with a purpose. So having a script, I would highly recommend it. So you're not reading off the script, but you're using it as an outline to make sure that you can go ahead and hit all of the main topics, yet still have a great conversational tone. You can tell stories. You can have an interview. That's obviously a great way to podcast too. A great thing to teach students in both writing and how it connects to podcasting is how do you create that hook, that first 10 to 15 seconds of an episode that makes your audience laugh or makes them intrigued or suspense, and how do you hook them in? When you listen to these podcasts, both by the Jesse's students and the winners of those podcast contests, you're going to be like, this is awesome. Like right from the beginning, you're hooked in and you want to learn more. Then finally, how do you incorporate music into this? And you either do it like Jesse had this way of using music for transitions, or you can layer music in the background depending upon the specific mood that you want to go ahead and try to create. I have a link in the resources to, I think it's 1,000 different ideas for podcasting. And it's a great resource to share with your students if they go, I don't even know what should we even write about, podcast about. And it gives them great student-centered ideas to be able to podcast about. And you can either filter those or just give them the whole entire list to kind of give them some ideas about what they could do. You can use it as an alternative to journal entries. You can have interviews and obviously debates with this. Is a great way to have creative storytelling. It's just easy way to be able to go ahead and do that. So technical needs. There's a need for any kind of device. It can be even a phone, but an iPad works amazingly. Obviously any kind of laptop computer or a PC or something that's a standalone computer. Software. You're going to need some kind of software. You might want to go in and have a microphone, and then you're going to want some sort of place to put this at, right? So student devices, any kind of thing, like I said, a laptop, an iPad, a Chromebook, anything, a phone will all work for recording of these episodes. And depending upon how high quality you want, you can obviously get into some things like you can use some recording and editing equipment. There's tons that are free. Audacity is a free, amazing piece of editing software that you can use if you have like a PC or a MacBook, something like to that effect, that you can download the software. If you don't, there's a software called Vocaroo, and you can use that on Chromebooks to be able to go in and record. If you're a Apple type of district, GarageBand is a great way. It's amazing. It's what a fantastic tool to be able to go ahead and to create things on. Soundtrap is a website that you can go ahead and use to be able to go ahead and do a limited number of free recordings. And it's hard to see on this thing, but the site that I highly recommend using is called Anchor. And Anchor.fm is the site. It's a web-based software that you can use with any of these devices, and you can record, edit, and host your podcast themselves. Highly recommend using it. It's free too. How about that? So you even have it, you could even use it, it's free. Microphone options, I always tell people there's a ton of different things you can buy. If you are going to purchase something, you could even buy something as simple as what I'm using right now, which is this Snowball mic made by Blue. They are about $50. I think in the picture there is something called a Blue Yeti, and they are about $100, a little bit over $100, and they are amazing quality microphones. And of course, you can just not use anything. You can just use the internal microphone of whatever the devices may be. There's a ton of different hosting sites. Jesse posted his podcast on the school website because it was appropriate for their elementary age students. That was the place where they could post it at. But you could use something like SoundCloud or Google Sites. Obviously, you could post it on Google Drive, even a school website. Seesaw is a great site, any LMS. And of course, there are paid sites, but you don't really even need to do or use those too. Awesome. I went through a ton of stuff here. Hopefully, that wasn't super overwhelming, and I'm sure it was. I'm going to go to press stop sharing here. Come back to my thing.
And Glenn, what an amazing session. It looks like we do have a question in chat asking about how often students will create their own activities instead of using one of yours. So that was in the XP.
Yes. So it happened on occasion, and with specific students usually who were inspired to do something outside of the box. And especially it happened a lot at the beginning when I didn't have a ton of variety of activities. But again, like I told you, I'm sharing everything that I've ever done and including my courses inside of Schoology, and you can explore those things and those, the little board that I created as far as on a Google slide, and you can go ahead and check those out and kind of get some ideas and kind of and adapt it to fit whatever it is that your content area. So it varied upon the group of students that I had, how many people, and I had a way for them to propose it too. So it's a really good question. So there was a way, and they understood too that their idea could be modified or it could be rejected. And that they had to understand that there might have been, like, I had to adapt it, like change it a little bit to make it fit, or I would go, that's a great idea, but maybe we can't do it this time. Let's go ahead and maybe explore it for the next time, So there were times where I had to basically reject that, or there were just ideas that were like, that won't work for us right now. But thank you for your, for your input that too. Yes. What are the questions that we got, Dave?
Yeah, so right now let's go ahead and have anyone go ahead and start entering questions in, or you can let us know that you want your mic on in the chat and we can respond to that too. Kendrick has a great one asking about podcasting, about books in schools, and how they can best prepare students for being prepared to actually podcast.
The biggest thing I would say about podcasting and preparing them, like preparing, is really just like an outline is great. Like I think, especially when you haven't ever done it before, because it's really easy to kind of get off topic. You may even want to, Kendrick, limit the amount of time to say, hey, you know what? We got to get it into 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever it might be. That way, your students are like, okay, there's a specific pacing that I have to actually go at. And depending upon how much time you actually have, Kendrick, to talk about the editing process, to be able to kind of, as you listen to some of these really, really good podcasts, they have edited. They've pulled out really good chunks of stuff, and it keeps going. And there's no ums and ahs and weird, awkward things. They've pulled each of those types of things out and then created a great listening sequence for the students. But at the beginning, really just let them choose great ideas that they're passionate about talking about, and then tell them that it's not just for you, Kendrick, that it's for a larger audience. And that larger audience could be just their parents and the stakeholders of that, that could be the appropriate audience of whoever that might be, so that they're like excited about sharing that it's not just for you, the teacher, it's for this bigger audience. Did you create more than one course level of Spanish using Minecraft? Yes, I have different activities. Let's call them like one-offs, tons of one-offs. So instead of doing what I used to do at the beginning of my career, and it still can be done, creating a poster, for example. I adapted some of those things or the outcomes of some of those things, and I put some of those outcomes inside of a Minecraft one-off activity. So it's a great question. And in some things, Daniel, I did for one of my classes, and I wrote an article, a couple of different articles about it, and I think they're linked also, going to be in the resources, where I did kind of an entire unit inside of Minecraft, just basically to see if it was possible. And it is possible, and I share all the details about it and kind of like what my experiences were and kind of what the outcomes ended up being. I don't recommend that for everybody. So please start off with a one-off activity and have a specific outcome with a specific amount of time that you're going to give them to do whatever it is that you want them to do. And then kind of gauge from there, what do you actually want? And you always want your students in any kind of these types of things, you want them leaving wanting more versus being bored. So you shut it down and you go, hey, maybe a month from now, we're going to be able to do this one thing. And then that wants them craving that thing, that activity. So you're not overusing whatever it might be, whether it be Minecraft or any other kind of activities that you use in your class.
Okay, we do have time for one more question if anyone is wondering anything else. But I do want to encourage everyone to jump out and follow Glen on Twitter. He shares and retweets amazing things from educators worldwide and is on there more hours than there are in a day. So definitely an incredible connection to be had there. He also was able to share a great Google Doc with all sorts of resources that he covered today. And Glen, I want to say thank you so much for sharing all of your information with us today. And to everyone watching, thank you for attending today and being able to experience this great community learning. If you enjoyed your time here today, please make sure to share it with your schools and other networks, and then mark your calendars for August 11th and 12th for the 2021 Transforming Learning Summit. We're really looking forward to sharing the conference agenda, speaking offerings, and virtual platform in the next couple months. And we thank Glen, as well as all of our volunteers that make this event run every month. And thank you so much, Glen, once again. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Any questions, follow-up questions, for sure, tag me on Twitter, DM me, follow me, I will follow you back.
Glen, great session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, bud.
Thanks, Glen.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and end it.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Bye.
Bye,
Yeah.
everyone.